I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone that's been listening and spreading the word. I've been going to some networking events and seeing some friends I haven't seen in a long time, and them coming up to me and saying, I've been listening to your podcast and it's so fun, and I told my friend about it, and that just really warms my heart. This is such a passion project of mine, and it's really cool to see the response that everybody has been giving me. So thank you to everyone that's been listening, and especially from the beginning. The other thing is, it's been really cool to see people that are not in the business sector listening to this podcast. One of my friends is a massage therapist, one's a sex therapist, and they've been listening to every episode and interested. And that was the whole reason of starting this, is that business news is applicable to everybody. And I want everyone to feel involved in the Seattle business community. Even if if they're not a VP at a bank, they don't have to be. It all applies. So the other thing before we get into today's episode is that to remember to go onto Apple and Spotify and follow and rank me. And somebody asked how to do that, and I don't know. I think you click the three dots or something, but find your Gen Z friend and have them help you. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into the episode. I have my friend and guest co-host today, Marceil Van Camp, the owner of Kamp Social House and also a real estate broker for Compass. Hi, Marceil.
Hello. Hi, Rachel.
We met, so you own Kamp Social House along with your wife, Katie.
I do.
And we met it was only last year. We're coming up on our friendiversary, by the way. At 40 Under 40, it was an event that I ran. And I remember meeting you at the event and being like, I have to be their friend. How can I do this?
Likewise. Yeah, same. Look at us now. We need a cake.
Look at us now. I know. It's been fun to kind of connect personally and professionally with you. So a little bit about you. Like I said, you own that restaurant bar. It's located in Madison Valley, and it opened just about 2 years ago. You're also the real estate broker, as I said. Prior to these roles, you worked at Amazon in both sales and marketing roles. And Marceil, I knew you were a badass, but looking at your LinkedIn, there's just a whole host of other corporate experience that you have before. So I don't know. What can't you do? So I'm very grateful that you're here.
Well, thank you. I'm blushing for those
Yes.
who can't see me, obviously, everyone.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is, if you remember from the first episode, I shouted out Kamp because I needed a place to do a photo shoot for marketing materials, and you so graciously let me come in there. You could have charged me. And I feel like that's women supporting women.
Absolutely.
And gay women supporting gay women. So
get it. Yeah.
We appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
So before we get into the news, why are you passionate about restaurants and real estate? Why did you get into that?
Yeah. So I think the two go hand in hand because of community. So ultimately, restaurants are community hubs, and I run a neighborhood restaurant for a reason. I really believe in building neighborhoods, especially across Seattle. And inherently, your neighborhood is comprised of homes, right? And neighbors and neighborhoods. And so I like talking about both, and the two go hand in hand.
I love it. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about community in some of these articles too. All right. Here are your top 5 stories. We've got the Boeing CEO and the commercial head step down, and a change up in the board. So a lot of changes at Boeing leadership. Then we have a little bit of a discussion on the Ballard dive bar scene. Third, we have the Visa Mastercard suit settles. Fourth, we have a potential Ponzi scheme. And then lastly, we've got some strip club legislation. So it's going to be a kind of a wide range of topics on this episode.
Yeah. What a wild week in news.
I know. Some of these are national news. I didn't do that on purpose, but I think they obviously have a huge impact locally that we'll get into. So are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. So CEO Dave Calhoun, he's going to step down from Boeing at the end of 2024. For context, he started as CEO in January of 2020. So he's been there. He will have been there for 4 years. This is obviously off at the tails of the door plug that flew off from the Boeing plane earlier last year. This year? Last year? I don't know. Recently. We all know the story. Go back to episode 1 if you don't. And then Stan Deal, president and CEO of the commercial airlines unit in Seattle. He oversees the production in Renton and Everett assembly plants. He is, quote unquote, leaving immediately, which I think we all know what that means. Mm-hmm. Ousted.
Yep.
And replacing him is going to be Stephanie Pope. She's the current COO, and she replaces him immediately. So then the third change, so again, we've got the CEO stepping down at the end of the year, Stan Deal, the president of the commercial airlines unit, stepping down immediately, and then the board chair, who's been the board chair for 13 years. And if you're not familiar with how boards work, they kind of supersede the CEO's role. So they're basically more superior than the CEO, and the board chair is in charge of the board. So he is leaving after 13 years and is going to be replaced, and that replacement will lead the search for the new CEO. After all these changes, these 3 shakeups, the share price is up 3% from when I was reading this article because of all of that. So it sounds like people are liking the change. And then some people were wondering, why keep Calhoun on until the end of the year? I think it's just, what the article states is that it's just so destabilizing to have all these changes happening. So at least keep him in until the end. So, Marceil, all of that. What are your thoughts on this? I know that some people are calling for the next CEO to be an engineer and not a finance person. I know you had thoughts on the new board chair. What did you pull from this article?
Yeah, well, I think high level, this reminded me of one of those reality dating shows, like who's getting voted off, who's going to stay,
oh my
who's
God,
coming
you're so
back.
Right. Yeah.
So that was
like Big Brother. Yeah,
absolutely. So that was my initial takeaway, but. So I was really excited to hear that Steve Mollenkopf, he was the CEO of Qualcomm, that he's going to be joining the board to lead the CEO search. The reason that excited me is because Steve is an engineer and has been at Qualcomm and built an incredible team and company and product for over 20 years. And I think it's because his focus was on engineering. And I really see that where Boeing failed was they focused on financial services and financial gain. I think there's a reason from stock price, wink, wink, that they're keeping Dave on the board, just as an example. And so I think that because they haven't emphasized engineering, which is really their hub, that they've struggled. And so Steve hopefully is going to come in and save the day.
Yeah, and we've talked about this where Boeing had such strong engineering roots, and that was part of their values, and you saw that in their product, and then they'd kind of moved away from that, which you see in a lot of different companies. And you and I were kind of talking about how the leader of a company, when they haven't had experience, so in your case, if somebody owns a restaurant but hasn't worked in the restaurant, what does that look like, and because you're constantly making decisions all day, every day about quality and price.
Right.
I saw that in my world in terms of events. All the time I'd have C-suite people saying, we can cut the budget for the band. Nobody needs a centerpiece. People don't notice it. You don't need a photo booth. Let's cut all that. Sure, somebody's not going to sit down and notice the centerpiece is missing, but they're going to sit down at an event and notice that it's a cheap event and doesn't feel high level. So, for you, how does that kind of relate in terms of the restaurant world and making those choices? Yeah.
So Katie and I talk a lot about the concept of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies.
Oh, stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. I like that. I haven't heard that.
Because the opportunity cost of cutting corners can be huge, right? So you might save $1 here or two, and ultimately that could be beneficial for the short term, but your customers, guests in our case, are going to notice. And will that impact their, ability or likelihood to come back? Probably.
Can you think of an example that you either haven't made that change at this restaurant?
Yeah. So, something as simple as the types of vendors that we work with. We work with lots of vendors, which inherently creates lots of additional work for us. But the reason for that is we want what's local, what's the most fresh, what's in season. Right. We change our menu all the time because of that. All of those things come with additional costs on the admin side. But we don't even blink about taking those costs on because it's what creates a really good product and a great experience. So
yeah. So I'm kind of on the camp of I do think the next CEO needs to be an engineer. I'm sure somebody that has a business degree and a finance person is really smart, but I think that's what Boeing needs right now.
I could not agree more.
Okay. Moving on, our next story. So this one isn't, breaking headlines. There's not a big story on here, but the Seattle Times did a deep dive into dive bars around the Ballard area especially. So I didn't know a lot of this. Max Genereux is the majority owner of Hattie's Hat, Smoke Shop, Sunset Tavern, The Pine Tavern, and Al's Tavern in Wallingford, but all the other ones are in Ballard. I love his story. He started out as a dishwasher at Hattie's, later a bartender, eventually takes ownership of Hattie's in 2009. A couple, years go by. He buys Sunset Tavern in 2020. He gets the Smoke Shop in 2021. He makes all these changes. Not all, I would say he makes some changes to these dive bars. Some examples are kind of redoing some of the dining room. Something in particular with Hattie's, if you've been there or have heard of them, they're known for their brunch. So he came in to what was a dive bar, added specialty cocktails for a certain demographic that would want that. He also, was focused a little bit more on the food because people were coming in, family crowds were coming in, not just people sitting in a bar and getting drunk all day. So in fact, last year was the first year that food outsold beverages because of this adjustment. The other change that he made that I thought was interesting was Sunset Tavern. I go there all the time for concerts, but he did a major renovation and divided the music venue spot from the bar. So if you wanted to get a drink, you're in a separate area. If you want to go into the show, you can bring your drink in there, but it's separate by a door. The reason being was that he wanted people to come in and drink and get the revenue without having to pay the cover. So you're getting the people that are going to the show, but you're also getting people walking by that just want to come down for a drink. So that's a little bit of an overview. There's a lot more in that article if you want to check it out. But Marceil, why do you think some dive bars survive and some don't? You know, he came in and kind of tweaked some of these to keep them surviving, but we've seen a lot of them close. Like, what do you think it takes?
I think Max really emphasized the fact that bars and restaurants are community hubs. They're the center of our neighborhood. So something as simple as the change he made to Sunset. I've been to Sunset many times. I've actually never been there for a concert. Oh. And so it's created just an opportunity for me to come in, grab a drink, or grab an NA cocktail, which he's got there as well. So super, super inclusive and focused on community. When you aren't focused on your community, then who are you doing it for?
Yeah. Do you think that, like, what about in terms of like personality of a bar? You know, sometimes these dive bars don't want to make changes because this is how it's always been. Sure. What are your thoughts on that?
I think they often don't last very long.
Yeah.
Business at the core, restaurant or bar is a business, and you have to pivot. Every business is pivoting all the time, very quickly. Things are changing rapidly. I don't think that you need to change your core focus. Not every Yelp review is going to require you to go make a huge change, but knowing who you are, sticking to kind of your brand and your mission, but then listening to your community and adjusting accordingly. Obviously, Max has done an incredible job of that. So I'm a huge fan. Yeah. For sure. And so.
Yeah, no, I love those spots. One other part of this I wanted to get your opinion on. So he had said, or the article says that in 2000, the average alcohol consumption at Sunset Tavern specifically was 2.75 drinks per person per visit. And now it's 0.8 per person per visit because they're coming in to see a show and they're not necessarily coming in to get drunk. So that was another reason why I think they separated the show part from the drinking part. And over at Kamp, I know you have a lot of NA options, but are you seeing this change in alcohol consumption? And what are you guys doing about it over there?
Yeah, absolutely. Ironically, I've probably contributed to the decrease at Sunset. I've been there many times, but I've never had an alcoholic drink there.
Oh, okay.
I've only had NA beverages. So the answer is yes. We've seen, at Kamp, we've been around almost 2 years, but we really came in knowing that people were drinking less, especially across generations. Just raw stats, Gen Z's drinking about 10% less than millennials, who are drinking about 10 to 15% less than their predecessors. And so we're just seeing less alcohol being consumed in general. Yeah. So at Kamp, I actually took a huge stint off of drinking to really learn more about, I called it my dry year, to learn more about the NA scene and whether or not the sober wanted to go to a bar, and if they did, what they wanted there. And so that's how we derived our NA, our non-alcoholic program, at Kamp. And
you really did your research.
I did. I absolutely did. And I think it's a trend that we're seeing not just across Seattle, but nationwide. I know we've done quite a bit of interviews and consulting about building NA programs across the country.
Yeah. I think it's smart too, because you're getting revenue instead of somebody coming in that's not drinking, just getting a water. They're going to spend $15 on a mocktail.
Exactly. And have something good and fun and adult.
One more question before we move on, because I know this is your level area of expertise, but Max looks like he bought so many bars, and that's a big undertaking, especially Sunset 2020 and Smoke Shop in 2021. So are you looking to buy another bar? And if so, what do you look for, and how do you decide when to do that?
Yeah. So we're looking to expand for sure. And when we look for a new opportunity, we're looking for, first, good business neighbors, good landlord, kind of that infrastructure has been so critical to us. As we've learned from our own mistakes in our current location, we have incredible community support. Maybe not such a great landlord. So those things.
Do you want to say their name? No,
I sure do. But we really look for community support and good business neighbors. So we're looking. You put the word out.
Okay. All right. Well, if you're listening, no, I'm just kidding. Okay. Well, let's move on to our next story. This is very much related to your line of work as well, but pretty big story. So Visa and Mastercard, they announced a settlement after almost 20 years of litigation over fees charged every time you use a credit or debit card. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then you've not been to a nail salon, because that's where I see it mostly is, it's a higher price if you pay via credit card. It's a little bit lower if you pay cash. And what they're doing is they're trying to not have to pay the fee themselves. The merchants are allowed to pass that fee on to the consumer. It's not illegal to do that. And the fee is typically a fixed fee plus about 1% to 3% of the sale. I've seen that a lot in my line of work. Every time I was paying vendors, if I wanted to pay by credit card, it was typically a 4% fee. And this is to the hotels. This is to a lot of people online. And then, you don't have that if you're paying by check, which can be challenging. So the deal that went through, it would lower as well as cap fees charged, and also allow small businesses to collectively bargain with for rates for the payment processor like large merchants do. The value of this is estimating about $30 billion. So these tiny 1%, 2% charges and fees are really, really adding up. But the interesting part of this settlement is that it's only for about 3 to 5 years that this is in place. And then I don't know what's going to happen next. So, Marceil, you obviously take credit card at Kamp. How is this going to impact your bottom line? What do you think?
It's going to have a massive impact, apparently just for the next 3 to 5 years, though,
yeah.
which we'll get to later. Yeah. But 2023 alone, we spent tens of thousands of dollars on credit card processing fees.
In 1 year, okay.
In 1 year. I am a small business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, what that could mean to my bottom line is massive. What that can mean to my team is massive. And so I look forward to learning more. I think collective bargaining power is critical for small business to succeed. I worked for a buying group for many years and really learned the power of harnessing small business to become a bigger entity. But what's going to happen once this is over? I don't know. I don't know how you plan for this. So we'll see.
I don't know. And hopefully there's some more that goes into it. I mean, and this affects so much more than small businesses as well. Like I was putting on a fundraiser and I was looking at like GoFundMe and I can't remember the name of the other one, but all of those, not only does the GoFundMe website take a percentage, but then you're also paying the credit card fee on top of that. And so it's not just these businesses, but anytime you're trying to raise money for stuff, if you're taking Square payments on site for something you're selling, it's everywhere, every time a card is charged. So yeah, it's going to have a huge impact. I'm glad to see that this is going through, but it kind of sounds like more work needs to be done on this.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So another piece of this article that made me think about this is the impact of moving from cash to card. So we were already kind of trending in that direction. And I think COVID sped that up in terms of people not wanting to take cash for sanitary reasons. And then I think there's also safety concerns of not wanting people to break in and take the cash. So let's say they don't have cash. But there's kind of another side to that argument. You were talking about how it can be a little classist to not take cash. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, I think wholeheartedly it is classist not to accept cash. Not everyone has access to plastic. Or the ability to wait for that deposit to go through. Some people are paid in ways that only allow them to collect cash that needs to be spent immediately to buy things like food or gas. I know unincorporated King County last year, they actually mandated that businesses that sell things like food, for example, take cash for those exact reasons. And I think that was a huge, wonderful move. Yeah, quite simply put, I think you have to accept cash if you want to be inclusive.
Well, and now there's the added motivation of well, not now, I guess, but like there could be more motivation to accept cash so you're not paying all these credit card fees. But yeah, I think it's an interesting story, and we'll keep an eye out and see what happens after the 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. I have a confession on our fourth story. I love a fraud story.
Ooh,
I do.
Yeah.
I love a fraud
True
story,
crime
especially if it's a Ponzi scheme.
For real.
Mean, I can't get enough. And we've got one here locally. Okay, so the headline is that FBI is investigating a Bellevue real estate investment firm. So for the last decade, this company called ICAP raised money from investors in Washington and then also elsewhere, promising to invest in Seattle area real estate projects. And I'm glad you're on here because you also have real estate background. So last spring, the company stopped making monthly interest payments. Then by the fall, they filed for bankruptcy, and a third-party restructuring firm called Ballard, they come in and they take over. So Ballard comes in and is like looking at the books saying, this is a Ponzi scheme, and I think somebody should investigate this, because basically they're using investor funds to then repay other investors to the tune of almost 2,000 investors for a total of $250 million.
Ouch. That's
right?
hard to read.
Quite a bit. So the U.S. Securities Exchange Commission and the FBI open up a criminal investigation. The CEO denies it.
Of course.
He says, oh no, we totally bought and developed and sold some real estate projects. Paladin just isn't qualified. Like they don't know how to read or something. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the FBI and the SEC don't get involved on maybes. I think they know what's happening and they're there to prove it.
I think so too. I mean, just based on my gut feeling, I feel like it sounds fishy. Mm-hmm. So what was interesting in this article is that his attorney, the CEO's attorney, says even an unprofitable business is not synonymous with a Ponzi scheme. Basically saying like, what actually is a Ponzi scheme? They really were just not profitable and struggling.
Sure.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't. I sure don't.
Yeah.
It's hard to I tried to look up, how do you define a Ponzi scheme? It wasn't as cut and dry as I thought it would be. But my take from this was that what makes it a Ponzi scheme is the speed at which they were giving returns to investors.
Oh, okay.
On the real estate side, I work with investors and we don't talk about quick cash very often. These are long-term investments and that's historically been true. That remains the same today. And so that, to me, that speed of return is what makes it sound
sketchy. Yeah. So you have experience with investors for Kamp. Mm-hmm. How did you decide how many to work with?
Yeah. So
did you want 2,000?
I $250 million in Kamp Social House.
Yeah.
We'd have quite a drag brunch. That's for sure.
That's true.
So yeah, we've been really lucky to receive offers from investors from day one. And we haven't said yes. And the reason being, we don't have the infrastructure to manage those investments, not at this stage anyway. Mm-hmm. We're working towards it, but it's really a separate entity and managing investors. You can't just take money, say thanks and run.
I think you can if you're ICAP.
So I would prefer not to be investigated by the FBI. So we're going to wait until we're ready.
Yeah. Yeah. I was also saying the more investors you have, the more opinions you have. And I was thinking about like when people's parents pay for their wedding, then they have opinions and you're like, ugh.
Facts.
So what do you think is going to happen?
I think that the FBI and the SEC are going to prove that this was in fact a Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. I hope they have enough to liquidate to be able to pay their investors back. I read a really heartbreaking story about a woman who'd invested over $1 million of her own money to help fund her children's college education. Oh. And that is gone, right? So that's the hard part. But
now I feel shitty for saying I like Ponzi schemes and fraud.
Well, but what's extra shitty while we're on that is I was trying to dig and see how many properties do they actually own? Like what did they do with that money? And I could only find 10.
Are you serious?
I am. 10 properties is not.
I mean, 10 properties on paper. I wonder how much they were telling the investor, or like saying to their investors. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything else on that one?
No. Let's stay tuned. I guess, I said, true crime girlies. I can't wait to hear what everybody thinks.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Okay. Our last story is about strippers getting rights in Washington. Really fascinating story. I am just excited to get into this. So Governor Inslee signed this bill that creates both safer working conditions for strippers and then also makes it possible for clubs to sell alcohol in Washington. So this is a state-by-state decision. So when we say safer working conditions, specifically, they're requiring training. There's mandatory security workers. There's going to be keypad codes on dressing rooms and panic buttons in areas where it's just this dancer and a client. Those are just some examples of the working conditions and the protections. The addition of, and one more thing is that the dancers are independent contractors. So think about like a hairdresser, how they pay for a chair and then they have to pay the salon to rent that chair. That's pretty similar to how dancers are. So what this law comes in and does is limits how much the owners can charge the dancers, which is $150 or 30% of what they make, whichever is less. So that's also protecting the dancers from not just getting totally screwed by the club owner. The other piece of this is, why is adding alcohol in this bill? They really go hand in hand because when you think about adding security and training and all these things, all that stuff costs money. So they can't just keep taking more and more money out of the stripper's pocket. And, you make some from the cover charge, sure. But you can't just keep taking everything from the dancers. But we also don't want the clubs to then fail if they're not making enough money because they have to pay for all the security. So a way to do that is to add alcohol to help with the revenue to pay for all of these things. So this doesn't go into effect until January of 2025. So don't go rush in to buy a drink today at the strip club. It'll take effect in early next year, and they still have to file for the licensees. And I'm sure you have experience with getting liquor license and all of that kind of stuff. So Washington has 11 strip clubs. So that's going to affect 11 of them. There's 4,000 in the US, and it's an $8 billion industry. So anyway, that's a lot about strip clubs. Was there something that I missed in this article or something that you wanted to add to this?
No, I think there's a really interesting correlation between the fact that the fact that strip clubs will be able to sell alcohol. That's a huge story. That's big.
Well, and specifically to Washington. So Oregon already has this. I think California has this. I think a lot of other states have this, but it's big for Washington for sure.
Yeah. And so then that packaged with these additional protections for performers is also massive. So this is just a really cool win-win. I think it's going to be fun to see how other types of businesses maybe learn from these types of changes, and those who might hire contractors as well, like I don't know, DJs or event planners. There's a lot of interesting trickle down. We'll see. Yeah,
I mean, like you mentioned, this really is getting at protections for gig workers and performers of all kinds, not just strippers. And kind of we were seeing legislation more and more so protecting them, which brings me to the point, you host a drag brunch every Sunday. What's that been like working with, like, how do you decide how much to pay them? Are they negotiating it as a group? Are you providing protections for them? What does that look like?
Yeah. So a big part of how we made decisions with regards to what to pay and how to pay and all that fun stuff was based on a situation that took place back in 2019. So there was a local venue, a pretty historical venue that hired...
Venue that will not be named. Yeah.
That hired lots and lots of performers of all types, specifically drag performers. And to cut a long story short, a large group of employees and contractors found out that the owner had been skimming cash off the top of their tips for many years in the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they came collectively to ownership and said, hey, we want our money back. And ownership swiftly fired everybody and just started fresh.
Wow.
And so that group of performers, a lot of them I am friends with.
Again, this is all Seattle. Yeah.
All in Seattle. Yeah. So Katie and I started learning more about just their experience and what had been happening and really how at the will of business owners they often are. So there was no standard for pay. There'd been talk about unionizing at the time, and Katie and I were really supportive and wanting to help. And then COVID just kind of blew everything up. But flip to 2022 when we opened Kamp, we just knew that we needed to create a really consistent base rate for a group of contractors who rely heavily on tips. And so we have, I don't know if it's the highest rate in Seattle. I know it's one of the highest rates for performers in Seattle. And that's very much on purpose. We want people to feel safe and confident and focus on great performance, which I think they're able to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important. I work with a lot of local Seattle musicians, and I've seen how low some of the restaurants and bars will pay for them to be playing for 2-3 hours. So I think it's really important that you as a venue is stepping up and paying that. So they don't have any kind of unionization here in Seattle right now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, this is where maybe learning from the strippers, specifically those in Portland who did unionize.
That's right. Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Which, by the way, the Portland strip clubs, if you're listening and you've not been to a strip club in a long time, you probably have this like very different image in your head than what the Portland strip clubs are. They've just done a really incredible job to make that a fun environment. Okay, I guess we're at the end. I always get sad at the end. But I want to, well, also I'll be at Kamp on Monday. I forgot to mention, I mean, you know that, but I'm producing a private show. And so that's another way in which this dynamic and relationship has been so fun for us. But I wanted to remind everybody to go check out Kamp Social House in Madison Valley. Is there anything in particular you have coming up, any kind of event or special menu item?
Well, we're switching over to our spring menu, which is always super fun. So come try some new flavors. But we're also going to be rolling out a Cinco de Mayo salsa competition.
Oh, boy.
So a taste-off. So we're picking our judges now. So stay tuned. So putting this out there, if you've got a good salsa recipe and you're willing to throw down, we'll provide the chips. So details coming soon, but that's
awesome.
Our next big focus.
Perfect. Okay. Well, Marceil, thank you so much for coming in and recording this and breaking down the news with me. For those listening, I hope this started a conversation with you and your friends and your colleagues. And enjoy. This has been The Weekly. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at theweeklyseattle@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.